Redmond, Utah. It's a little town 100 miles south of here. And today we're going to answer a question that's been debated for 40, 50 years, and that is salt bad or beneficial? And if you're as old as I am, you remember the day when salt was really bad. It got a lot of bad PR. Back in the day, I felt like I had all the social status of a drug dealer because I was working in an industry that was selling a product detrimental to people's health. But hopefully when you leave today, you're going to have, you won't have the same opinion that the AMA and the media has. I should tell you, I'd like to tell you how I got into the salt business, because I don't have a PhD, I don't have a master's degree in salt, but I've been involved in the salt industry since I was 11 years old. When I was 11, my father and uncle started a salt business in Redmond. My grandfather had actually bought a farm in the 1930s, just north of Redmond, Utah, and he farmed it. But each neighbor, both neighbors on each side, had open pit salt mines, and they were mining this salt that had been laid down during the Jurassic period. In fact, I guess my career into the salt industry really started 150 million years ago when God created this earth and he put a deposit of salt there in southern Utah. A lot of people, when they think of Utah and salt, they think, well, the Great Salt Lake. Well, the Great Salt Lake has a lot of salt, but it's not Utah's best salt. Utah's best salt is what we're going to talk about here today. So anyway, my father went into the salt business, selling this salt. Back in those days, the salt was only sold for livestock. Because of the minerals that were in it, they were viewed as impurities, so it wasn't considered fit for human consumption. And that was the case up until the 1960s. And we'll talk about that later. The main thing that you're going to take away today is the difference in refined and unrefined salt. That's the big thing. There's a war on salt. You may be aware of that. The media, the AMA, the FDA, there's a war on salt. And it's ironic because if you go to the IV, if you're in an accident and you're in the ambulance and you're on your way to the hospital, or you get to the hospital and they have to type your blood, or they're not ready to, really take care of you, they hook you to an IV. What's in that IV?
Saline.
Saline solution. The very product that we're told don't consume, don't use, that's what they put in there to sustain your life until they are ready to do more. Now there's three reasons that salt is important for us. Well, there's probably a lot more, but three that we want to talk about. Your body, it's important that your body maintains the proper fluid levels between the cells. Intercellular fluid is really critical. Well, what helps maintain that intercellular fluid and the fluid in the cells is salt. Salt is also a nerve stimulant. How many of you came here today in an electric vehicle? False. You all did. That's a trick question. You all came here today in an electric vehicle. Your body is an electric vehicle. Without that charge of electricity that is going through your body, you would be flat on the floor, lifeless. And the thing that helps our bodies be more efficient with that electricity is salt. Let me show you something. Water is a really good conductor of electricity, right? You never want to drop an electric wire in the bathtub.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So between these two wires, there's water. And you can see that, yes, that light bulb is sort of lit up, right? Would you like your body to function at that level or at that level?
That one.
That's the difference that a little bit of unrefined salt makes. So it's a great nerve stimulant. And the other is digestion. And I'm going to unplug and get rid of that so we don't trip on it. Digestion, your saliva, your stomachs, hydrochloric acid. It all needs salt, and an unrefined salt is better for it. Now, you've all heard of people who get put on a salt-free diet, right?
That's sad. I like salt. No, I'm salt.
It is sad, and yet people who get put on a salt-free diet, well, let me show you. The symptoms of low salt starts out with nausea, vomiting, headache, confusion. These are the symptoms of low salt. Well, when you all know people who have been put on a salt-free diet, did you witness these symptoms right away? Or were these symptoms very obvious? No. I'm going to say they weren't. And the reason is this. Why we don't see more problems with salt-free diets is when somebody's put on a salt-free diet and they eliminate all the salt at the table, that takes out 5% of the salt in a person's diet. If they don't put it on in cooking, if they don't use it in cooking, they take out 6%. Now, 12% of the salt that people get is naturally in the food. Now, if you eat food, you're going to get that 12%. But the vast majority, 3/4 of the percent of salt that we as individuals get is in the processing. So if a person's put on a salt-free diet and they eliminate, the first two, that's 11%. They're still getting over 80% of the salt, unless they're one of those people like my wife who is she follows the rules. She's a rule keeper. If a doctor tells her to, and we don't go to doctors very often, but if, somebody were to tell her to do something, that's what she does. So who we see really their health compromised with salt-free diets are those people who the doctors tell them to avoid salt, and it's somebody who's doing their own cooking. They're not eating any processed foods. So not eating any processed foods, they're not getting the 77%. And so now, if they're doing their own cooking, they eliminate the 6 and the 5. That's the poor people who we really should feel sorry for. And I know of more people whose health has been compromised, hurt by salt-free diets than have helped. In fact, at the end, we'll talk about a book called Salt, Your Way to Health, written by a Dr. David Brownstein. Getting out of medical school, he did what he was trained. If people had high blood pressure, he put them on a salt-free diet. But he paid attention, and he noticed that the people who he put on salt-free diets, many of them, they got more autoimmune issues, chronic fatigue. All these problems showed up when he put them on a salt-free diet. And so then he wrote his book, The Dangers, Salt Your Way to Health, and his message is unrefined salt. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So salt is not salt. There's a difference. And the key is refined versus unrefined. So what is salt? I'm not going to go into as much detail here because this class is shorter than what I usually have time to teach. And my next class is better anyway. Don't ignore this side of the table until the next class. But, Na, that's the abbreviation for salt is NaCl. It's sodium chloride. Na, that's the sodium, Cl from the chlorine. And sodium, ironically, and this is amazing to me, our Heavenly Father is the world's greatest chemist. He takes sodium, which is a highly reactive metal. If you had a chunk of metal and you threw it into a pond, wait just a minute and it'll explode, like you've thrown a stick of dynamite in there. Because sodium is a highly reactive metal and it will burn at room temperature. If I had a chunk of here, if this were a chunk of sodium, if I picked it up, I wouldn't pick it up with my bare hand. There's enough moisture in my skin to activate that sodium and it would burn my hand. Now, chlorine, anybody breathe chlorine on purpose? No, it's a totally poisonous gas. So together, a poisonous gas that could kill you, a highly reactive metal which would burn you, hurt you seriously, together they become essential for life. Not just handy, not just make your food taste better, essential, because every one of us spent the first 9 months of our life in a saline solution. Amniotic fluid in a woman's tummy is a saline solution. Heavenly Father is amazing. So salt's not salt. What's the best salt? Anybody here use sea salt? Anybody think that sea salt is special? It is not. Sea salt means nothing.
Real salt.
Sea salt is absolutely nothing. Now, years ago, it did mean something. Back in the 1930s, and this is the reason why there's a big hype on sea salt. Back in the 1930s, a nutritionist determined that the ratio of sodium chloride to minerals, that ratio in natural seawater is the same as in the human blood. So since the minerals and the sodium are in that same ratio, he went on to theorize that if you got a sea salt with all those minerals, along with the sodium chloride, the body could assimilate it easier. It would complement the body, fit like a hand in a glove. And so his research is what created the demand for sea salt in the 1930s. Well, by the 1960s, companies had realized that they could take seawater and leach off the minerals, and with the sodium chloride there all by itself, legally it could be sold as sea salt. Or, a salt deposit where the minerals settled out separately and all it is sodium chloride, that could also be sold as sea salt. Every salt on this planet can be called sea salt because it either comes from a modern ocean or an ancient ocean. So sea salt means nothing. So we talked about why they want it. Prior to the 1960s, it did mean something. Not anymore. This is that guy's study, why sea minerals. So the best is unrefined salt with the minerals in that proper ratio. That's what you want. And so what to look for in a healthy salt? Well, number one, the color. White salt, white sugar, white flour are all in the same category. Avoid them all. White sugar, white flour, white salt. The salt shouldn't be white. It should be, there's different salts. So in Hawaii, you can get a black salt. Here in America, you can get a pink salt. In fact, there's two. And we're going to talk about, there's a Himalayan pink salt, there's a Redmond pink salt, but salt should not be white. You want some minerals in there, and those minerals generally will give some color. It should not be free-flowing. If you've got a shaker of salt in your kitchen cupboard that you only use maybe once a week for Sunday dinners or when company comes, go home and take that shaker and turn it upside down. If the salt in that shaker doesn't move, if it is caking, then it's a good salt. If when you take that shaker that hasn't been touched for a week, and if you turn it upside down and the salt flows, don't eat it. It's got chemicals in there. They put chemicals, anti-caking agents in salt to keep it from setting up because salt is hygroscopic, meaning it absorbs moisture out of the air. If we had an open container of salt in here with the moisture that's in this air, even here in this dry Utah climate, the salt will suck that moisture in and then it'll cause it to cake. So you want your salt to cake. If it doesn't cake, set up, that means there's chemicals in it. So you want a salt that is not free-flowing. Taste. Natural salt should have a mild, sweet taste. I've had people ask me how much sugar have they put in the Redmond salt. The answer is none. But people think there's sugar because it doesn't have that bitter bite. Those chemicals, those anti-caking agents, the free-flowing agents, those chemicals that they add to commercial salt are bitter. So then they add sugar, dextrose, to hide it. If you've got a standard normal container of white salt at your house, and hopefully you don't, but the next time you're at the grocery store, go to the salt aisle, pull off a can of some 26-ounce round container of salt and look at the label. That plain salt will very likely have yellow prussiate of soda, sodium aluminum silicate, and dextrose. The dextrose is the sugar to hide the bitter chemicals. Plain salt is not plain. It should have a full mineral analysis. ask the company if you're getting a salt, have them send you a mineral analysis or ask them about it. But you have to be a little careful here because there's companies who are either, I don't know if they're deceptive or if they're just not aware. Because there's some companies who sell a sea salt and they say that it has over 80 minerals. There's a Celtic salt, boasts over 80 minerals. Well, if you get their analysis, and they don't put it on the package, but if you write to them, contact them, and get an analysis, they'll send you a piece of paper that has 80 minerals listed. It's got 80 in there, right? No. More than half of the 80 have a little less than symbol by them. Remember in high school chemistry, there was the less than and the greater than? Well, half of the minerals that half of those 80, they can't find any. But rather than put 0, they put less than, meaning maybe there's some there, we just can't find any. But a company, if you've got a true sea salt, there will be actual minerals, 60 plus. Now, why do you want an unrefined salt? Yeah, it makes your food taste better, but there's other reasons. Water retention. The first experience that we had with an unrefined salt, there was a lady in Emery County, and she was pregnant, and due to during this pregnancy, she always had a water retention problem. She was in her 5th pregnancy, and she had always had a water retention problem. She had pregnant shoes and non-pregnant shoes. And in this pregnancy, 5th pregnancy, she was still in the first trimester. She had to quit wearing her wedding ring, and she was already in her pregnant shoes. And she read an article by a German doctor that said if you got an unheated salt, a natural unheated salt, it wouldn't cause water retention. So she said to her husband that she was going to write to Germany and get some of this natural salt that this doctor was promoting. Her husband was an old farmer there in Emery County, and he knew about the salt over at Redmond. And so he said, honey, I know where some natural unheated salt is, and it's out in the corral, and whatever the cows haven't eaten, you're welcome to. Tongue in cheek. But they made a trip to Redmond, got some of Redmond's unrefined salt that was only sold for livestock because of all these minerals that made it unfit for human consumption. But they got some of those chunks. They went through the chunks and found the cleanest looking chunks they have, because Redmond had dark red chunks and light peak chunks. Found the cleanest looking piece they could find. Took it home, busted it up with a hammer until he could put it through his magic mill wheat grinder. Made table salt. Within a month, she had lost her excess water, was back to her non-pregnant shoes, and wearing her wedding ring again. Went through the pregnancy with no excess retained water. She thought that was really cool. So she gave some to her sister who was pregnant, and she had a similar experience. So it became a tradition at family reunions. They would take roll call as to who's pregnant or thinks they might become so before the next reunion, and they would give them little mason jars of this table salt that they had made with their magic mill wheat grinder. Lots of stories about water retention. Blood pressure. This is a fun one. Remember the Latin word for sodium? Natrium? I'm guessing you're probably the only one that really hung on that because you're, somebody in school. Natrium is the sodium word for sodium. Well, the body has 5 systems to raise blood pressure. It has 1 system to lower blood pressure. And God designed it that way on purpose, because if you're being chased by an enemy tribe or a saber-toothed tiger, our ancestors, they needed blood pressure, and they needed it now to preserve their lives. And so the body has 5 systems to crank up blood pressure that quick. But once you've escaped the tiger, once you've killed the enemies and the danger's over, it's not important that your blood pressure drop as fast as it went up. So our Creator has 1 system to lower blood pressure. And it's a peptide made in the atrium of the heart. So it's called atrial natriuretic peptide. Natriuretic. It needs sodium to make that peptide. So the body, to make this peptide, to lower blood pressure naturally, without sodium, can't do it. So the very thing that they take away from people could have helped them. And so, yes, there's a midwife in Park City, Utah. If she has a client in the latter stages of pregnancy threatening toxemia, well, now they call it PReclampsia, she gives them a 1/4 teaspoon of Redmond salt, natural salt, every hour on the hour until their blood pressure is normal. Usually it's normal within an hour, but if not, she'll give them a second 1/4 teaspoon. Have them stay in her clinic. An hour later, if their blood pressure is not normal, she'll give them a third.
How do they give that to them? Just
1/4.
in the mouth?
You can either throw it in your mouth and wash it down, or you can put it in a glass of water. And a 1/4 teaspoon in a glass of water doesn't taste bad at all. I'll tell you more of that with the next story.
Okay.
Anyway, we have a daughter-in-law who, now she says, this midwife says, don't do this with refined salt.
Oh, yeah.
He said, this has to be unrefined salt. But we have a daughter-in-law who after we learned that, she's had 3 pregnancies, and all 3 pregnancies, they would end in high blood pressure. Her doctor would tell her all the things she needed to do to, get it down, keep it down. She would say, thank you, I appreciate your concern, and she would go home and take a 1/4 teaspoon of natural salt. An hour later, she'd put her cuff on, her blood pressure would be normal. If or when it tracked up, she would just take another salt. There's an RN
Do you
in,
take too much salt?
we'll talk about that. There's an RN in North Salt Lake who she was on high blood pressure medication. She was taking 300 milligrams a day of some drug, and I don't know what the drug was, but it took 300 milligrams a day of that drug to keep her blood pressure in check. And she was concerned because as an RN, she had read the fine print. She knew the side effects, and one of them was miscarriages, and she was trying to have a family. And in the 2nd trimester of a pregnancy, she lost a baby. And she vowed to get off that drug. So she found a practitioner there in North Salt Lake who, through muscle testing, they determined that her body needed a teaspoon a day. Not a 1/4 teaspoon, a teaspoon. So she began taking a teaspoon a day of natural salt. And in 2 days, her blood, now she was an RN. And, to tell an RN who's been trained in the medical world that take a teaspoon of salt, how counterintuitive is that? So she was taking her blood pressure twice a day to make sure it didn't get worse. Well, in 2 days, her blood pressure began to track down. And in a week, it was halfway down to normal, so she cut her medication from 300 milligrams to 150. A week later, her blood pressure is normal. She cut her medication to 0 and just kept taking the salt. But once her body had reached what she called homeostasis, balance, she found she didn't need the extra salt every day, so she would just take her blood pressure first, and if it was normal, which it was now most of the time, she took no extra salt. She just used it liberally on her food. But if it started to track up, she would just take extra salt, and it would come right back down. I have a friend, that story's for the women. I'll tell you one since there's a guy in here. I have a friend in Arizona. He's a construction worker, and I shared some of this information with him. He said, I would love to get off my high blood pressure medication. He says, it has some really nasty side effects that I don't like, but he said, I don't like high blood pressure either. He said, I don't need a cuff. I can feel when my blood pressure is high, and I don't like that, but I don't like the side effects. I said, well, don't put your life in danger. Don't even do this unless you've got your own cuff. But here's what this RN did. He said, I have a cuff. I live next to the Walmart. I've got a cuff 24/7. So a month later, we're talking, and I said, hey, did you try the salt? And he said, yes, I did. I said, did it work? He said, yes, it did. He said, I'm off my medication, and my blood pressure is normal. I said, how'd you do it? And he said, well, I have a water bottle that I take to the construction site. I just put the teaspoon of salt in it, so by the end of the day, the water's gone, the salt's gone, my high blood pressure's gone. And about 5 years later, I was talking to his dad, and I said, hey, how's Dion? I haven't talked to him for several years. And he said, he's fine. He doesn't have high blood pressure, and he doesn't take natural salt every day. He says he keeps a bottle of water in his truck, just a standard water bottle in his truck that has a teaspoon of natural salt in it. Anytime during the day, if he feels the symptoms of high blood pressure, because he doesn't need a cuff, if he feels the symptoms of high blood pressure, he goes to his pickup truck, drinks that bottle of water that's got a teaspoon of unrefined salt in it, and within 30 minutes, all signs and symptoms of high blood pressure are gone. And when he gets home at night, he fills the water bottle up, puts in a teaspoon of salt, and throws it under the seat of his truck for if and when he needs it again. Those are just some. Let's go on. But again, it's natriuretic peptide. Give your body what it needs to make the peptide that's going to lower your blood pressure. Restless Legs, this one is dear to my heart. Not because I had restless legs, but my wife did. Oh, you have them?
I do that sometimes, yes.
Okay.
What is a restless leg?
About the time that my wife would fall asleep, her legs would jump like somebody had hit her in the hip with a cattle prod. I mean, if I was next close to her, I'd almost get kicked out of bed. And of course, it would wake her up. She couldn't go to sleep because about the time she would relax, it would wake her up. And that would go on for hours at times. And it was really, when she was really tired, when you really wanted a good night's sleep, that's when it'd be the worst. Well, at work one day, I heard from somebody over in the world that a teaspoon, it's the same teaspoon that RN was using. No, I'm sorry. It was the quarter teaspoon. The quarter teaspoon that the midwife was using for high blood pressure for pregnant women, that quarter teaspoon would eliminate restless leg syndrome. And I thought, wow, I can't wait to tell my wife. Well, being a typical husband, I went home and never thought about it because she didn't have restless legs every night. It was just when she was really tired. Well, about 2 weeks later, we'd gone to bed and she was really tired and her legs, started to jump as she would fall asleep. And I said, honey, I heard at work that natural salt gets rid of that. Do you want to try it? And she said, Neal, I'm too tired to get up to get it. And I thought, well, I'm not. I jumped out of bed, ran to the kitchen, and I said, do you want salt in the water or just want to throw it in your mouth? She said, I don't want to drink salty water. So I gave her the quarter teaspoon of salt. She threw it in her mouth, washed it down. I took the glass and the spoon back to the kitchen. As I'm getting back in bed after turning off the light, she asked very skeptically. So it's not a mind game. It's not like, you don't have to believe it. She asked very skeptically, so how long is it going to take before it works? And I said, I don't know. They didn't tell me that. We'll have to wait and see. She was asleep before they jumped again. One night we were in the recliners watching the 10 o'clock news, and her legs started to jump. She went to the kitchen, got her own quarter teaspoon of salt, came back, watched the news without a single jump, and when we went to bed that night, her legs didn't jump once. It's an ideal electrolyte. We talked about muscle cramps. Anybody ever ridden or heard of the Salt to Saint bike race? It's Salt to Saint because they race bikes from Salt Lake City to St. George, Utah. So it's Salt to Saint. And most often they do it in teams of 2 to 6 people, and then they take turns. We have a friend who does it solo, 32 hours on a bike, nonstop. And in his training, he learned that natural salt would eliminate what they call hitting the wall. Ever heard of athletes hitting the wall? It's when these extreme athletes just push their bodies to the point where they run out of electrolytes and they cramp up and they can't go on. And it's Heavenly Father's way of preserving their lives, because some athletes are so into it, fanatic, that they will run till they die. So God preserves their lives by this hitting the wall. Well, he found that by taking the natural salt, he never hit the wall. And he told his 30-year-old son that. Now, this guy I'm talking about, he's 50. Got a 30-year-old son. They're both in these bikes. And this dad says, hey, the natural salt keeps you from ever hitting the wall. His son looks at him and says, you're my father, not my trainer. So wouldn't do it until they were on a bike race together. 200-mile race, 175 miles in. The dad comes over a hill and hears his son sitting on the ground. He knew he had hit the wall. The dad grabs his salt, his water bottle, steps to his son, throw these in your mouth, wash it down, you'll be fine. The son had actually called his mother and said, come get me, I can't finish the race. The dad gets on his bike, calls his wife and says, don't come get him, he'll be fine. The son finished the race before the dad.
So there's salt tablets, refined salt tablets, or just the grains?
Well, we'll talk about the 3 best salt. If they're made out of, if they're one of these, then it's fine, whether they're tablets or whether they're loose. Celtic from France. These are alphabetic order. Celtic from France. I question it because they say it comes from an unpolluted ocean. But when I hear that, I want to ask which planet are they shipping it in from? Because an unpolluted ocean on this planet is a stretch of the imagination. Himalayan from Pakistan, I'd say it's better because it's an ancient salt. It's pink, has minerals. I would say it's better than Celtic. But the last one, I would say, is the best because both Himalayan and Redmond sell the salt for cows and horses. If you put a salt in front of a cow or a horse next to Himalayan, animals eat Redmond before Himalayan. Why? Here's a tip. Add salt after food is cooked. Heat hurts salt, even natural salt. So add the salt after the food is cooked. That works for vegetables, for meat, for stews, for pasta. It does not work for homemade bread. If you're making homemade bread, you got to put the salt in the dough because the dough, the salt helps activate the yeast. What about iodized salt? Avoid it. Now, I didn't say avoid iodine. Yes, you need iodine, but don't get it from iodized salt. It's the worst form of iodine, the least available form of iodine they make. So get your salt from a better source. Kelp tablets, a lot of foods, most natural salts, the Himalayan and the Redmond both have iodine in them. Is it enough? I don't know. But it's some, but if you need more, don't get it from iodized salt. Other uses of salt: bathing, gargling, nasal irrigation. I know I finished that fast because we've got 5 minutes for the next class. Any questions on salt? I've got some handouts here with all these notes, so you're welcome to take one. Questions? Did I answer? You had questions. Did I answer them?
I just,
Oh, can you take too much salt?
yeah, can you take
If you're healthy, you cannot take too much salt. Your body will just flush it out. Now, that said, I wouldn't suggest eating a cup a day.
Yeah, that's another question. How much is, I guess everybody's different.
It is.
Right?
Yep.
But my son, who lives in Arizona, where it's really hot, he works construction, he puts the salt in his water. I just have had a hard time.
Hey. And you have a hard time what?
I have a hard time doing that. I don't like salty water.
Okay. You can take the salt and make capsules. You can take an unrefined salt,
Okay.
like
I can do that.
yeah, just
I have a capsule maker.
yeah, just make your own.
No, I don't.
So
But I would.
How much?
how would I know when I've had enough?
Test. It's your own body. This is a crazy story. When my wife and I go out to dinner, well, when we sit down to eat, the first thing my wife does is, without tasting the food, my wife picks up the salt shaker.
I do too.
And I say, what? I say, have you tasted that? Are you sure that needs salt? It always needs salt. Well, and it bothered me until we went to a place where we had blood work done. My wife's sodium was in the basement. Her sodium level was way, way low. That's why she was craving salt.
Oh. So she's not the same as you?
No. She's better than me in so many ways. So if you're healthy, your body knows what to do with excess salt. Yeah. Again,
So basically you won't take.
no, not if it's unrefined. Again,
Right. And
too much of Morton's. Yeah.
The only time I ever use refined salt is when that's the only option. I have thought about taking that little tiny thing in my purse everywhere I go, just because.
You know what you need?
Oh, there's even a smaller one.
Yeah.
At Redmond's, they sell them? Okay.
Shireen might have these.
Oh,
She does. She does it.
Yeah. So, any other questions on salt?
No, but that's great information.
Okay. I don't know. Let's see if there's. Oh, I said the resources. There's some books. Well, and they're on the handout too. Salt Your Way to Health. This is by that David Brownstein, and this on the handout. And The Salt Fix by Dr. James, and Your Body's Many Cries for Water by Dr. Batman. Those are all. We're done. You can come on in. So, okay.
you're giving the next class.
I am. Right.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm signed up.
So, yeah, we're now changing from clay to salt.